So imagine all the ideas in the world, and you have a certain subset of those ideas, right? Based on your own thinking and based on what you have learned from other people. And that is very dangerous because when you rely on other people for ideas, those other people may not have your best intentions at heart. And that could be politically, but it also could be if everybody does that, if nobody questions things. And when I mean question things, I mean really question things. Like not just what's happening in the world, but everything you know. And that could be very emotionally disorienting. I mean, having your beliefs challenged is not comfortable at all for a lot of people. A lot of people really enjoy it. I really enjoy it. But for the majority of people, I think it's very uncomfortable having your deeply seated beliefs challenged. And that's okay. But it is a necessary evil. It's also the case that often when you're thinking about things, you can find stuff, you can realize things about yourself that you may not want to know. But let me just make the case that it's worth it. Imagine you lived in a room your whole life and you were isolated from the whole society, right? But maybe, and you got food, right, from a machine, like it would deliver food, and maybe you would get like the essentials, and maybe you would even get a pill that would make you happy or something like that, or keep you like satisfied, and you would get the essentials. So you would get the essentials for living. That would be a pretty boring existence, right? Okay, so that's one extreme where you don't learn anything about the real world. You're just like that is the most extreme version of not like learning about the. Now let's say there's this really good quote from Letters to a Young Poet. I'll just summarize it. Basically, if you're in a prison and in a cell, and it's just the cell, right? Not like being in a room from birth, but instead you're just in a cell, right? Starting now. You may be very bored, but you also have an infinite amount of novelty from your childhood and from your experiences living on Earth. And what can you do with those experiences? I mean, you surely haven't squeezed as much out of your experiences as possible. Almost nobody has. But you can get so much more in terms of self-improvement. But not just self-improvement, being a more interesting person. I mean, you can curate your mind by introspection, by thinking about things. So what do I mean? Well, it really comes down to going into your mind. It's best if you're able to be bored. I mean, it's very difficult to do now because we are living in a world that is very hypersaturated and it's very difficult to get any moment of boredom. But believe me, being bored is important. And I'll link a study in the description about that if you are interested. But really just think about something. I'll give you a question. Is morality subjective? If you answered yes, why do you think? And then consider, okay, like morality is subjective because yada yada yada, or what is something that's not subjective? Is there anything that's not subjective? What makes something true and what makes something false? And you're gonna have to don't like go and ask ChatGPT, because that will kind of defeats the point of the exercise. The point of the exercise is not like literally answering the question. It's asking more questions, like thinking of examples from your life and from your experience on Earth and just from stuff you know. And that journey, because it's like literally not even about the answer. The answer is like so unimportant. That's like the most boring part. Like, yeah, there's a question, then you get come up with an answer. The more interesting part is how do you get from that question to that answer? Like, keep track of that journey from getting to that question to that answer. Like, what sort of questions do you ask in the way there? And there's a good chance that you never answer the question, but I guarantee you that you will learn something about yourself. Now, I know a lot of people will look at this and be like, oh yeah, he's just like a cringy 17-year-old boy. And they are right. But that is some logical fallacy. I don't know what it is. I'll put it on screen. And it's just not really relevant. And so you have this first method of like thinking about the world and going on these journeys. And as you go on these journeys, you'll uncover like more of the tree of ideas. Another thing you can do is read. Read philosophy. Now, I know it's going to be very difficult, but in doing so, alongside thinking about stuff. And I mean, like, if I could give any advice to any person like younger than me, or even anybody older than me, if they're willing to listen to me, it would be think about stuff, and it would be read. And if you can't read, right, because maybe you have a poor reading comprehension, maybe you have a poor attention span, then I think it helps to first think about things, and then you'll gain a greater landscape of ideas. So for example, let's say there's this really good book, The Origin of Consciousness and the Bicameral Mind by Julian Jaynes, and I started reading it recently. And he talks about, okay, where did consciousness come from, right? And what I recommend you do is first, if you ever read that book, and you haven't thought about consciousness, first think about it. Like, what is consciousness, right? What is it? Like, what does it mean to be like have that sense of like, what is it like to be you, right? The fact that something is conscious is that there is something it is like to be that thing. And if you don't know, I mean, part of it is also having certain facts about things, right? Like I think it's somewhat easier. It's on one hand, you could look at your own experience of consciousness and you could deduce from that. And if you're pretty clever, you can get really far. Even if you're not clever, even if you don't have an answer, just if you can't come up with an answer, ask a new question, modify the question a little bit, tinker with it, come up with examples, right? Think of what are different states of consciousness. Where is a dream? And then you could also read Origin of Consciousness, but before you read it, it's important to have at least a minimal landscape of ideas, right? A minimal understanding of like some ideas that often you will be reading and be like, oh yeah, I thought of that. You can read stuff. I mean, you could read my Substack. I post some stuff and I'll be posting some more stuff, especially soon. I mean, it's not that full yet. Michael Huemer in my last post advertised his Substack. Reading stuff in general is a little bit of a shortcut as long as you're reading it. I don't think audiobooks are as effective, in my opinion, because part of it is rereading. And it's like not as, I think it's more difficult for these more dense topics. But it doesn't even need to be books. It could be YouTube videos, right? It could be news, right? It could be op-eds. It could be Substacks. I personally think reading is better and more efficient. But it is a little bit of a shortcut. And I think it is one where you should do both. I think you should do both. And also, I think if you're in school especially, it could very much help with school. A lot of something I've noticed, like with people my age and a little bit younger, teachers are often talking about it too, that people don't have, a lot of this generation, maybe because of COVID, maybe for other reasons, are lacking a certain cultural knowledge, right? They're lacking a certain like foundation of knowledge. So to learn, let's say you're taking like high school chemistry or even high school biology, it helps to have ideas about stuff, right? But let's say you're learning about stoichiometry, right? It will help to know about ratios. It'll help to know about baking. Or like, even if you haven't actually baked, just like stuff with baking. Or if you're learning about, say, how is glucose turned into energy, cellular respiration. This is a process that's made up of lots of biological machines. So maybe if you know some engineering principles, and you don't need to actually like study engineering, right? But it helps to maybe think about, like, for example, okay, how is this set up? And maybe that's not interesting for you, in which case you don't have to do it. But regardless, I promise you, if you're a student and you think about things, it will help you in your classes. It has helped me in my classes. And it's something fun. It's something almost beautiful and interesting. It gets you excited almost. Like, wow, that's cool. That's cool. And it helps with your studies, I think. Or even just having deep conversations with your friends and like wondering about these things. You know, you could look at my recent video, Unsupervised Unsupervised teenagers discuss philosophy. And like, that's the sort of thing that we do. I mean, it's kind of nerdy. It is nerdy. But like, Dennis, the guy who I was talking to in that video, said like how, for example, learning music theory helped him so much in his math classes, and it made him just so much better at picking the stuff up more efficiently. So if you ever have like free time, I mean, it's so useful in terms of like, if you're taking like a literature class, analyzing literature, even if you're taking a math class, like whatever, just thinking about stuff, because it gives you a bigger picture of the landscape. And the more of the landscape you have, right, the more clear your picture of the tree of ideas is. And the more you could see how one idea relates to another idea, and this idea relates to this idea, the more easy it is to learn new things. It's sort of like almost exponential, but it's also interesting because as you learn things almost exponentially, or as things get exponentially easier to see, you start to realize how little you know, and that's okay. Thank you for watching. It's been Lil Micah Z. I'm out.